Putin sees this not simply as the future of Ukraine, which is Russia's most important neighbor, but in many ways, I really believe he sees this in some ways as the future of Russia. He in no way wants the liberal virus to infect Ukraine, because his fear would be that obviously it would become a demonstration effect for his own country.
Right. I am fascinated by this, a little bit off script, but with the Russian fleet in the Black Sea off of Odessa and the rest of southern Ukraine, how does America and how does Europe respond to that? I mean, it's become literally a naval action as well, hasn't it?
There's not a lot the U.S. and Europe can do, because normally we would provide all sorts of economic help, but only with strings attached. People are not going to provide $10, $15, $20 billion of help without certain types of political and economic conditionality. That's exactly what Yanukovych is not going to agree to when he's under siege. So in a funny sort of way, our hands are tied because we don't want to throw good money after a bad situation. So we almost have to see where things come out. If he basically prevails, then we could introduce help with conditionality, or if there's a new government, we could provide an awful lot of help.
Ambassador Haass, when does this move from an uprising into a civil war? What has to happen?
Well, then it's simply a question of whether it grows. You had the first serious show of force by the government in the last 24 hours. Whenever things like happen like this, whether you're talking about Syria or other places in the Middle East, or quite honestly, Paris in the middle of the 19th century, it's now a battle of nerve. The question is, does the government and the security forces keep its nerve? Are the protesters prepared to continue to put their lives at jeopardy in the hopes of overthrowing the government? So that's the dynamic now.
Ambassador Haass, Vice President Biden called President Yanukovych last night, asked for him, in effect, to de-escalate. Instead, we find out that 25 people are killed overnight. What do you think the likely next series of events will be over the, say, 48 hours?
Well, I would expect you'd have more of the same. The U.S. can call for restraint, but we don't have ways to either enforce it or terribly well to incentivize it. I think the critical dynamic now is essentially, right, will the government and the security forces remain willing to kill their own people if that's what it takes? If they are,
Richard,
then the regime is likely to survive.
Richard, we are a long way from Secretary Kissinger's classic diplomacy. Then we go on to the Washington consensus, and then I don't know what the new foreign policy is. Within the theory of what you do at the Council on Foreign Relations, what should be America's international relations when we feel so useless with the Ukraine?
Well, more broadly, I would say two things. One is you got the president going to Mexico today, but it's against the backdrop of no movement at home on immigration and increasing questions over whether we could ever give him the trade promotion authority he will need to negotiate trade accords. So the biggest foreign policy challenge continues to be the domestic, Tom. And then secondly, I would say the United States has been overly invested in the Middle East. We haven't been paying attention enough to events in Asia, including Thailand. Meanwhile, you've got things like Ukraine and Venezuela spinning out of control. So I would simply say we need to rebalance our foreign policy away from this over-fascination and emphasis on the Middle East and take into account more Asia and the rest of the world.
Very quickly, Richard, where should we look in Europe for leadership? They won't take Merkel's phone call. Which institution in Europe will get this done?
Tom, Europe and leadership are borderline oxymorons. I mean, you've got institutions like the OECD and others to deal with the security thing, but the bottom line is you don't have Europe as a collective entity when it comes to being a foreign policy actor. So the answer is you can't look to Europe for leadership, which is one of the advantages that Putin has. He's a single lone operator. He makes decisions. Europe does not have that kind of capacity.